on idleness. I was brought up in a Protestant tradition, which meant that among the most serious vices was idleness. Idleness, among other things, I was told, led to potentials for temptation, sin, and awful crimes, because your mind was able to run loose in the periods when you were sitting around doing nothing. And since work and activity and getting on with things was such a high virtue in Protestant traditions, I should be getting on with things. And I know my wife was brought up not in a formally Protestant household. It was the same. If she was just sitting meditating or even sitting reading, her parents would say, "Why are you wasting your time? Get on and do something." And so I associated idleness with depravity of some kind or other. Whereas when I went to Nepal and saw people in a mountain village, I arrived in the winter, which is a quiet season for agriculture, and people seemed to be intolerably idle. I felt quite indignant that they just sat around. There was so much that could be done to improve their lives, I thought, and there they were sitting around having cups of tea and chatting and playing with children and so on and so on, having festivals. Later I discovered, of course, that in the monsoon season they worked like fiends and they needed a rest. But I can remember the sort of moral outrage, or at least a disapproval I had. But later, as I've grown older and maybe learnt a bit or two, like various philosophers, Montaigne and others, I've begun to appreciate that there's no distinction really between idleness and non-idleness. When we are idle, in other words, we appear to be doing nothing, we're sitting, and the extreme form is obviously when we're sleeping, that doesn't mean we're not active. Our minds and brains and our hearts and our bodies are very active during those periods. And indeed, it's often in moments of when in pensive mood, as Wordsworth put it, in idle or pensive mood, are the moments when you really think something important or work things out. So now I find idleness a great virtue. It's difficult to say what exactly is the difference, because, for example, when I go for a walk or when I sit listening to music, that could be branded idle, but my body is active or my mind is listening to music, so it's hardly idle. And even if I sit, as I do now, going in on the bus, looking out at the countryside, I'm tempted by my upbringing that I should be doing something useful and reading a book or writing something. But sometimes now I allow myself the luxury of idleness, just not doing anything. And I think I noticed my mother becoming like this later in her life. In fact, she invented a word which is not often attributed to her, but no one knows that it came from her. But I think she invented the word to pootle, which means a kind of idle activity. She was on the Outer Hebrides, and it describes, I've seen it in her work just at the time when it came into the English language, of, in her case, an elderly lady getting onto a little moped and then with a box of sandwiches heading off in no particular direction to go and sit with her back against the wall of a broken down croft and look out over the loch at the birds and so on. So it's an aimless, idle activity which she loved, and to pootle was the preparation for that. So I'm increasingly learning the value of pootling, of idleness, and that it's not necessarily a prelude to dark and evil thoughts. So allow space in your life for quiet idleness and don't feel guilty about it.